Ilishnish continued following Nemel around on her tour of Warden's Vale and its nearby villages. As evening fell, they returned to the minion base and Nemel went out to subjugate 3 more goblin tribes. This was achieved through means suitably arrogant for a minion leader, flying high overhead while nullifying their pitiful projectiles with a casual wave of her hand. She then rendered the tribal leaders helpless in a domineering arcane display. Now, Nemel had just as many goblin minions as human ones. According to her boss minion, a larger population would make activities in the settlement more economical. Division of labor was more efficient and minion instructors could teach larger groups of neophyte minions at once. Like the human lords of the Sorceress Kingdom, the Imperial Science seemed to naturally pursue the raising of more minions for her nascent minion empire. "You're so much more energetic than before," Ilishnish noted from her throne of logs. You've reached an unprecedented level of aggression." "After everything that I've seen," Nemel said, "can you blame me? My target before was some longhouses and workshops before winter so my people wouldn't freeze. With undead labor, we can be there in 2 months instead of 2 seasons. The problem now is, well, labor. At the projected rate of clearing, we'll have a crazy development backlog. Bringing in settlers from the Empire will help alleviate things, but it's just not enough." "So you plan to train goblins," Ilishnish said. "I can't say that this is the brightest of ideas, in more ways than one." "They don't have to be geniuses at their work," Nemel replied. "There are a lot of low-complexity tasks that undead labor isn't capable of. If they can do that reliably, it frees up human artisans for other things." Out of the goblins Nemel had conquered, 7 were mystics. 14 were verified rangers, leaving 11 generic goblins with the basic camp skills common to all goblins. 2 of them were identified to have magical potential by Fenros and set aside for magical training. The rest Nemel hoped could be taught vocational skills by the human migrants. First, however, came basic education. After looking at the schoolhouses around Warden's Vale, Nemel purchased 100 slate boards from the harbor's general store. Boxes filled with sticks of limestone were procured as writing implements. The human settlers were all provided with 1 to assist with their work and the goblins were all provided with 1 to aid in educational instruction. Others served as notice boards or went into the workshops and storehouses to help keep track of production and inventories. In addition to their other duties, Fenros, Elise and Ida would teach reading, writing and arithmetic. Since the literacy rate amongst humans in the north was poor, 2/3 of the migrants attended too. Classes would be held in the evening and a roofed-over area was being raised for that purpose. "What are you envisioning for your first village, exactly?" Ilishnish asked. "I don't have an exact idea of what I want," Nemel answered, "but I thought those elevated and walled farming villages were amazing. The light towers, especially. This site we're camped on will serve as the main harbor for the territory, so it will end up as a town. I'd like to see a scaled-up version of what we saw today here." "Why do you like the light towers so much?" "Something about them just tickled my fancy. I'm definitely going to build a bigger one for this harbor. The druid grove they recently planted in the Lizardman village is a must, too." "We seem to have drifted far from potatoes." "We'll have those too, of course," Nemel said defensively. "Some other crops will be necessary, plus livestock like chickens and cattle for eggs and cheese. Being able to cook up a decent meal out of our produce alone is a good goal, I think. Beyond that, I have to figure out what advanced industries we should focus on." Always being able to have a good meal was a good goal. Humans often overlooked the simple things that would make them happy for bigger things they could never reach. "What are you considering?" "Well, our development will be tied to Warden's Vale. Trying to compete with that huge foundry would be impossible and our timber exports would be a sliver compared to theirs once we're done clearing farmland. If we're trying to match the desired demographics for Lady Zaradnik's domain, there will be all sorts of magic-related industries to consider. I was hoping you had some ideas." "Me? You've lived for far longer than I have, so you must have seen all sorts of things. Plus this is your domain, right? You're obviously doing something supernatural to it so it may result in features exclusive to this territory. Snow and ice are exclusive to this territory for most of the year. Or at least they were. I was hoping for something more mystical. Precious herbs infused with elemental mana or crystals that grow on the cliffs. Stuff like that." They sounded valuable, But Elishnish wasn't sure if anything she had seen in the past century or so matched the description. Despite Neml's assertion, Elishnish hadn't done anything like picking up random herbs and minerals to see what humans would pay her for them. "You may want to conduct some research on that," Elishnish said. "I believe the best bet is to see what the Adventurer Guild's Azalizia expedition has turned up. It was my father's old domain, after all. Did you have any ideas of your own that you feel particularly attached to?" "Well, I'm from a long line of wizards, so it's all magic related. Honestly, having a cozy community of magic casters comfortably distant from the big city has a charm of its own. I could relax and conduct research in my tower, eating potatoes every day. Doesn't that sound nice? I'll have you know that, while I can eat anything, I prefer meat." Then it can be meat and potatoes. Neml told her, "The point is that I'll be able to pursue my personal goals instead of working to make ends meet every day. Not that I won't be doing my job, but having leeway in life makes a big difference in one's outlook." Aside from the potatoes, Elishnish thought she could agree with that. A small column of goblins arrived at the camp, depositing bundles of freshly cut firewood into one of the storehouses. Elishnish watched the orderly line of demi-humans make their way back out to the edge of the clearing. "I can't say I've seen goblins behave like this before," she said. "They're usually more chaotic." "Really?" Neml didn't look up from her paperwork. "I thought you told me about the hobgoblin thing because you knew about it." "Well, understanding that lords project certain effects on their tribes isn't the same as seeing it in action." "I suppose you're right about that," Neml murmured. "Stories about goblin armies are commonly known, but this is one of those cases where the truth is stranger than the tales. I treated them like soldiers and they just naturally played the part. They aren't exactly like Imperial Knights, but there are far more similarities than there are differences. In a way, it's scary." "How so? They're still just goblins." Neml threw a look over her shoulder before focusing on her work again. "All right, maybe to a dragon they aren't scary, but as a human, it's scary. We see them as a sort of non-threat unless there are a lot of them around and we think they're stupid and primitive. But all it takes is a single hobgoblin to rally all the goblins in an area and transform them into an army. If they manage to raid a cache of equipment or enslave some blacksmiths, you have a very real problem brewing. Companies of goblins can strike all along the frontier and fade deep into the forest where it's practically impossible for human armies to hit them back. Do you think they can threaten other races like that?" "Of course," Neml nodded. "Humans take pride in the idea that equipment, martial discipline and magical expertise allow them to stand up to a world filled with savage threats stronger than they are." Elishnish scoffed. "Not everyone can be strong, Dame Verilyn," came Neml's reproachful reply. "Most people are weak. Goblins are even weaker than humans. That thing that I said before, people don't really seem to consider it, but the use of equipment, martial discipline and magical expertise are not exclusive to humans. It makes me hopeful for these little guys." "Hopeful, Yes, hopeful. They just seem to be natural at fitting into larger organizational schemes. Maybe that's why you see them everywhere. Except in human lands. Imperial citizens see them as dirty and stupid, but it's more like they're uncomplicated. That can actually be an advantage." "Well, I can't say I disagree with that idea, but how does it work to their advantage, precisely? As you've noted, they're not frost dragons. Take their whole propensity to form armies once an officer appears, for instance. In the Imperial Army, the sergeants spend a lot of time breaking in new recruits. It's not just training them how to use a spear and stand in ranks, but all sorts of mental and physical conditioning must happen as well. A commoner off of the street comes in with modes of thinking that aren't suited for military service. They're not loyal to each other and lack aggression. They're not receptive to command authority, which means that they don't receive the full benefit of their officers." "Does that mean human adventurers are different from Imperial Knights?" "They're very different," Neml said. "They say that a veteran Imperial Knight is about as strong as a silver rank adventurer, but an army of 10,000 silver rank adventurers would lose 100% of the time to an Imperial Legion of the same strength. Adventurers only train to fight as small units at best, while Imperial Knights are components of a fully functional army. It would be a one-sided victory." "So you plan on raising a goblin army?" Neml blinked at Elishnish's conclusion. No. The boss minion said, "It's more that I think goblin nature can be harnessed for other tasks. They have that uncomplicatedness that allows them to naturally exist in the state that the Imperial Army works so hard to instill into its recruits. I think it would make them ideal for squad tasks. I see. That's why you've divided them into groups to labor around the camp. It won't stop there, Nemel said. Once they get their basic education, they can be trained in various vocations. If I'm right, they'll become an industrial force to be reckoned with. So you're exploiting the nature of the goblin race to your advantage. You're becoming more and more like Lady Zaradnik. I'm not exploiting them. Not in a bad way, at least. They'll become productive citizens and their quality of life will improve. It's a mutually beneficial arrangement to a point. I understand that you wish to be good to your subjects, but everything that you've mentioned doesn't address some fundamental issues. Such as? Ilishnish tilted her head curiously at the human lord. Your willful human blindness is getting to you again, Ilishnish told her. For some reason, your race believes that growth is unlimited. What happens when this benevolent society of yours reaches the limit of what the land can support? Will you send your spares to the city to be conveniently forgotten just as the humans of the Empire do? Turn your problem into someone else's? That would take a long time. It will happen eventually. Or is this more of the same? A problem for someone else since you'll have long expired from old age? That bylaw you're so scared of, the one that allows subjects to eat one another in specific parts of this territory, exists because there is no solution to that problem aside from controlling the population. I'll have you know that I have no intention of eating hundreds of thousands of goblins a year. I'd become fatter than Hegenmel used to be. I might turn green, as well. Nemel set down her work, getting up and sitting down again to face Ilishnish. What do goblin tribes usually do when there are too many for the land to support? Nemel asked. They raid if possible. When resource shortages reach a certain point, they have to migrate or starve. If they migrate as skilled work teams, I'm sure they'd be welcomed elsewhere. That may be true, but, in the end, it's a dream that requires constant expansion. I'm not sure if the Sorceress Kingdom allows its constituents to independently declare war on other countries. But I'm not raising a goblin army for that, Nemel told her. Didn't you say you'd be satisfied so long as you got your taxes? I did. I'm just pointing out some problems inherent to your benevolent plans. At some point, you won't be able to afford that same benevolence. What if I just implement population controls some other way? Limiting the number of children each family can have, for instance. If you could do that all along, why do you have so many spares in the Empire? Well, children aren't guaranteed to survive to adulthood, but it's mainly inheritance laws, I think. Men inherit before women, so it's a cultural norm for those who wish to pass on their wealth to have at least one male heir and one male spare. That means the average landlord or tenant has 3 to 5 children to get those 2 males. But only having 2 children means that even if something happens to the heir, the spare inherits regardless of whether they're male or female. It doesn't work because the heir inherits the entire estate. What happens in your scenario is that you have the female heir getting married to another heir to consolidate the estate, resulting in more land, power and influence for their heir. From there, it happens more and more frequently until you have territories that were once carefully divided by a liege belonging to one house, resulting in powerful political and economic players that shouldn't exist. It's a recipe for chaos, and a good noble will act to stop the formation of a potential monopoly. Ilishnish idly scratched the bark off of a log beneath her. In a desperate effort to pass on what one generation possessed to another, mortals devised all sorts of silly schemes that resulted in similarly silly behavior. In that case, Ilishnish yawned, can you think of any solutions? New legislation for new realities, I suppose, Nemel replied. It's easier said than done, though. Those in power stay in power because the law affords them that power, and that power allows them to maintain what they consider a desirable status quo. Honestly, most people in the Empire are preoccupied with living from season to season, so not many call for change. The Emperor rules with an iron fist, and his laws and policies support a country where men dominate politically and economically. Rumor has it that he despises the 2 female sovereigns in the region, as well as the remaining unmarried Princess of Riastais. Considering his habit of purging his opponents, no one dares to openly propose change. But this isn't the Empire, Ilishnish told her. Also, the majority of the lawmakers in the Sorceress Kingdom are women. That might be true, but I barely know anything about this country. I don't want to run around pushing for change out of nowhere. I'm not even a noble, technically, just the seneschal of one of the gentry. No one would listen to me. Whatever confidence Nemel had seemed to only extend as far as the limits of her authority. It was a strange quirk of many humans. They chained themselves to arbitrary rules and principles even when no one else watched or cared. Lady Zaradnik would probably listen to you, Ilishnish said. She listens to pretty much anyone when it comes to proposals for improvement. As if that isn't scary enough, Nemel laughed nervously. Maybe I'll try when I feel more comfortable here. Having a few successes under my belt will lend me more credibility. Scary? Human law was rife with nobles who were portrayed as unapproachable, be they benevolent or malevolent, but even children came to Lady Zaradnik with their ideas. Maybe she was missing something. If that's what you think is for the best. So all of those laws that I memorized but don't quite understand are still going to be in place by the time I get back, right? Unknowingly breaking a new set would result in all sorts of suffering again. Suffering? Please don't make me recall it. Sorry. I didn't know you were going anywhere. Lady Shiltir is sending me southeast to the beastman country next to the Draconic Kingdom. I know nothing about it and I have no idea how long I'll be away for. Nemel frowned up at her. That wasn't a good sign. Doesn't that country constantly eat people from the Draconic Kingdom? I hear Queen Draudillan asks the Empire for help on occasion. What do you know about them? That was about it. I don't think the Empire has ever responded to those calls for aid. I've never read any materials on the Beastman country in the university libraries either. I don't even know its name. Anyway, with whom will you be going? That's something I'm trying to puzzle out. I can't exactly bring humans there if I'm going to lose them to predation as soon as we cross the border. Well, if it's a beastman country, then why not bring beastmen? Quagga are mole beastmen, right? I have a feeling that won't work. From what Lady Zaradnik said, it's populated by big predator-type beastmen. They'd probably see Quagga as food. Are there any beastmen that would fit in? There are, but... They're the Kronos. I have no idea what those are. You know, the evil little sheep that I talked about. Little sheep sound like food for big predatory beastmen. Huh. I'd like to see them try. The ones I'm referring to are big spotted felid types, though. The two races are collectively referred to as the Kronos by Lady Zaradnik. I don't think their actual names can be interpreted into any form of human speech. They had a way of speaking between themselves that Ilishnish found highly intriguing. Rather than using words, they conveyed pieces of themselves somehow. If frost dragons could communicate like that, sharing information would be a lot easier. Then why not just invite the Felid Kronos? Nemel asked. Can I do that? Why are you asking me? Could she do that? Both races were reclusive, but it was the sheep that made the most terrible impression. If she brought a group of Felid Kronos to the Beastman country, things became convenient in various ways. Even out-of-place behavior would be shrugged off as the quirks of a group of foreigners. If she did the same thing alone, she might be discriminated against and Lady Shiltir would punish her severely for her lack of progress. Ilishnish gazed up at the evening sky, trying to imagine what it would be like to be picked on by beastmen, but the only related experiences were watching cats and Kronos stalking and killing their prey. She replaced the memory of a dead rat dangling from a cat's jaws. Then she replaced the rat with a pitiful-looking frost dragon. A shudder rippled down the length of her body. Are you all right, Dame Verilyn? Nemel's worried voice rose from below her. Do you think they'll become my minions? Ilishnish asked. I thought you were looking for someone to travel with, her minion frowned. Not become your minions. But you became my minion when you traveled with me. I became your min vassal for an entirely different reason. Well, I'm fairly certain that most people would become your minions. Actually, no, they'd become your minions for the entirely wrong reasons. What reasons might that be? Sex. Huh? Don't tell me. Nemel scowled. You knew exactly what you were doing in the Empire. You played so many people with your ridiculous charisma that I stopped counting after East Estate. Even I thought I was going to be. Going to be what? Nothing. Ilishnish had been relying on intuition, limited knowledge and raw skill in the Empire, but Nemel made it sound like she was scheming the entire time. Beyond that, the Empire was uniformly human. She wasn't sure how she could appeal to so many different races in the Beastman country the same way. She supposed it was worth a few attempts. She rose and arched her back, stretching her wings and tail with a wide yawn. "It seems that there's nothing left to do but try," she said. "Is there anything else you need from me before I get going? I thought you were here to lord over your minions." "I was. It doesn't invalidate the question, though." Nemel rose from her seat, brushing off her skirts and looking around the camp. "We should be all right for now," she said. "I can always message you if something comes up, right? The eastern border of the Draconic Kingdom shouldn't be more than a few hours away for you." "I'll take your word for it, but that doesn't mean wherever I am in the Beastman country will be a few hours away. I can always come back in an emergency, though." "Thank you, Dame Verilyn." Her boss minion curtsied as Ilishnish launched herself out of the clearing and took wing. She eyed the slopes of the nearby mountains while she ascended above the peaks. "How do I even know which ones are decent? Do the best ones have the shiniest coats? Maybe I should just try the largest ones." Differentiating humans was difficult enough. Gauging them by their apparent strength alone didn't guarantee quality. Merchants and artisans were generally weak, yet they did all sorts of useful things. One had to figure out how each vocation decorated themselves and their establishments to display their significance, and even then there were those who purposely or inadvertently concealed it. She eventually spotted a pair of Kronos Rangers, the same pair who made their territory in the high ravine along her northern border that she sometimes conversed with. They watched her land from their rocky den concealed in a stand of conifers and thick shrubs. They had little in the way of garb beyond woolen loincloths fastened by rawhide belts holding several containers and tools. Excuse me. We are not interested in becoming your tenants, Seeker." Maybe she should have used minion instead. It had a far nicer ring to it than tenant. Humans just didn't know how to make an impression. "I didn't come about that," Ilishnish replied. "I am going to a distant land of beastmen and I desire companions to travel with. Might you be interested in seeing new and exotic places? Or perhaps know someone that might be interested?" The two Kronos Rangers exchanged looks. The female of the pair padded up the slope and disappeared into the trees. "We know of someone who would be interested," the remaining male said. "It should not be long before my mate returns with him." Ilishnish brightened, her tail waving lazily in contentment. She appeared to be off to a good start. "Oh, wonderful," she said. "If I got it right, your name was something like Pinecone? How was the winter?" "There was no hardship," Pinecone replied. "The conditions of your territory drove many animals to our side." Maybe freezing the entire thing had been a bad idea. She wondered how many of her resources had run away. If only she had something like Nook. Maybe she could grab a few young ones from the Azalisia Mountains and start a herd. The female Kronos Ranger, whose name was some sort of smooth grey pebble of a certain size with distinct features, returned after a half hour. To Ilishnish's great dismay, Pebble flew back with one of the Kronos druids. Ilishnish's scales flattened and her wings unfurled nervously as the murderous sheep thing approached. "This one will travel with the Seeker," it declared with a bleat. The magocrat. Out of the many societies around the world, it is not only primitive forms of tribal culture that give rise to classes born from the need for leadership and stability. When a significant sphere of civilization begins to embrace magic and institutions for the arcane arts are established, a new need arises, one left unfulfilled by what came before. Into that void, the magocratic elite make their appearance. No mere wizards secluded in their lonely tower or free-willed sorcerer prone to personal whim, the magocrat is as much a leader as a mage. It is not magic that comes first to the magocrat, but the communities that they serve. They are not necessarily founded in aristocratic institutions, but it is more often the case than not. Much like the noble fighter, magocrat job classes are not base job classes, but prestige classes with specific cultural qualifiers. Additionally, as noble fighters have a school of combat and favored weapon category, magocrats choose a specific field of study and may specialize in a school of magic. As such, magocrats can vary widely despite all possessing the same job class, much like wizards and sorcerers. All magocrats share several common aspects, however. As leaders of civilized society, they possess the same bureaucratic, diplomatic and cultural aptitudes as their non-caster counterparts. They may use their charismatic power to inspire the masses or instill fear. They have an appreciation of arts and culture, and their balanced approach to progress and governance lays the foundations for the further advancement of society. Be they a humble bureaucrat working in a remote frontier court, an archmage who reigns over the battlefield, or the grand vizier of a vast empire, the goal of the magocrat is the same: they bear the torch of arcane culture, bringing the light of magic to a dark and mundane world. Their wisdom, artifice and arcane might invariably fuel the rise of powers ascendant. 14th day, Lower Earth Month, 0 CE. I'm beginning to wonder if all of the West is just a giant desert. No, I'm past wondering, it is just a giant desert. A pair of gigant marols kicked up sand far ahead of the sledge as the caravan of long sledges conveyed its passengers through the shimmering heat of the Great Loot. The source of the griping was an inquisitor named Jaraka, a bar male of 33. You should know that isn't true. The chronicles speak of many places in the west that aren't deserts. The great steppe north of the Wallspine, Arborea in the south, the vast mangrove of. I see none of that here, Yavroj. Jaraka's notched ear flicked in irritation. I only see sand, sand and more sand. Ever since we journeyed beyond the Gran Cerrado, we've been traveling through deserts or sailing by them. Deserts with no sand are still deserts, by the way. Deserts were plentiful in the world, so travelers journeying from one part of the continent to another were bound to see them. However, after disembarking at Stormport, the Jewel of Loot and the home of Tor-Zoxus, the Storm Dragon Lord, even Soraka couldn't help but sigh as yet another endless sea of dunes stretched out before them. We're almost there, Jaraka, Soraka said. You may as well appreciate the scenery while we're here, we won't be seeing it for a while. No wonder everyone calls you Priadasi these days, the Inquisitor snorted. Even the scorching sands would receive your kind regard. On that note, Soraka said, don't throw around any titles once we've arrived. We're here to see what this prospective client is like without them falling over themselves to impress us. Got it, young master. Spare me the young master, Soraka winced. I feel like that's going to get me slapped out of nowhere. I don't think anyone would survive getting their hand hit by your face, young master. The shimmering horizon shifted in hue. Soraka peered into the distance as distinct shapes gradually formed. Kasturi, he said, what do you see? A town and a lake, the Gladestalker replied. An oasis? That should be the Great Tier, Davy said, the largest of the tiers of loot. I hope there's enough salt available to fill our sledges. I don't see any fortifications, Soraka half said to himself. Unless you're trying to bury yourself in sand, Jaraka said, it seems pointless. He had a point. The Great Loot was the empire of a powerful dragon lord. Any troublemakers would summarily be turned into a blasted ring of char on the sand. The Storm Dragon Lord had dozens of powerful blue dragon satraps under him, and their tolerance for raids and disruptive mischief in their domain was non-existent. The Camellini driving their sledge stopped at a long trough just outside the town. He went to pay the beastmaster stationed there to tend to his lizards. One by one, the rest of the caravan sledges arrived. Soraka disembarked and stretched, glad to be through the 300 kilometers of meandering dunes between the coast and their current location. His entourage came over from their sledges to join him. It was probably not a sight that the locals would see again in their lifetimes. Not only were several of his wives present, but also a dozen members of Gon's Royal Guard, some of the most powerful combat specialists of the Beastman Confederacy. To avoid unwanted attention on their journey, those who could not conceal their power wore items that did, and they wore the protective garb commonly worn by desert folk to hide their equipment. Svarmini, one of the sacred claws, lowered his head before Davy. Where would you like us to bring the cargo? Leave it for now, the bar merchant replied. Let's find out what the markets here have to offer. No need to stand on ceremony, split up and see what there is to see. They separated into groups and entered the town. Soraka went with Davy, his first wife, and was accompanied as usual by Jaraka and Kasturi. Karavaki, Soraka's second wife, had already gone ahead. She and her cohort, rather than heading for the market, went straight to the town's temple row. Soraka's gaze lingered on the collection of humble shrines. Most of the objects of worship were unfamiliar to him. She never tires of that, he murmured. Why would she? Davy said, it's interesting, in its own way. It's also her job. As a part of her official duties during their travels, Karuaki was cataloguing the various religions and philosophical sects capable of producing divine magic casters. In areas of the world with polytheistic religions, which was most of them, many correlations could be found between supposedly disparate faiths. Worship of the four elements in some form was one of the more predominant examples. Davy led them over to a bustling bazaar, where stalls were shaded over by tarps of every color. Rather than stopping at any souvenirs, the merchant's daughter, a successful magnate herself, browsed through everything that looked like it had been imported. Kasturi went and joined her at a silk stand. Soraka exchanged looks with Jiraka. "I think we're stuck," he said. "We are," the Inquisitor agreed. Soraka settled on watching the crowds. A half-dozen Sing were present, as were Camelini, some race of tortoise folk, the lizard folk known as Laerti, desert variants of common demi-humans, and at least one Jinni. Their garb aside, it was what one would usually see in a desert bazaar. Additionally, the presence of a Jinni meant that there probably wouldn't be any Friti or Dao present. Mareed obviously wouldn't frequent a desert. "I don't see any humanoids," Jiraka noted. "You're right," Soraka crossed his arms. "Strange, there were more than a few in Stormport. Maybe that theory of yours is turning out to be correct." "I wouldn't call it a theory. It's more a random thought." The theory postulated that there was a region surrounding the civilized areas of the world where the density of many humanoid races was low to non-existent. Soraka reasoned that the area beyond that region was filled with feral humanoids. The sheer behavioral incompatibility of those races made it more practical to kill them off than keep them around, creating a zone where none existed. Elves were a notable exception to the idea. They were a race with dozens of countries and enclaves around the world, and he suspected there were more of them beyond the bounds of the Confederacy's knowledge. Elves were a unique case, however, as it was not the general strength of the race as a whole that allowed them to maintain their feral state, but the ridiculous power of certain individuals spawned from the world-spanning antics of the Eight. "Well," Jiraka said, "since we're stuck here for a while, it's a good chance to ask. I intended to ask when we arrived, but—" He wandered over to a large stand where a group of Sing were admiring a red dragon scale vest. The Laerti merchant's annoyed posture straightened at his appearance. "Welcome, dear customer, welcome." The lizard folk merchant licked her eyes and looked up at him. "Has our fine showpiece drawn your esteemed interest?" "It doesn't seem to be enchanted," Soraka said. The merchant perked up even further, regarding him intently with her slitted reptilian eyes. "Ah," she said, "it seems you are not from Rolengork, but the Confederacy? What you say is true. Loot's red dragon scale tends to be enchanted at its destination. Then that means Rolengork is not a desert country." "Indeed, dear customer. Rolengork is mostly jungle, so enchantments from our artisans here would not serve them well." "Wouldn't green dragon scale work better there?" "It would, but the beastmen are many and green dragons are few. Red dragon scale still affords superior protection and fire resistance is nearly never a waste. All that remains is to add one's enchantments of choice." The group of Sing wandered away. The Laerti merchant sent a dirty look at their backs. "Though I say that," she muttered, "it is difficult to send anything but salt and other uncomplicated things to those northerners." "You must have been through a lot for that to come out," Soraka chuckled. "Aye." The Laerti tapped her claws on the pavement in resignation. "I have been trying to sell this vest for my master for 5 years now, you know. Rolengork is counted among the strong countries, but it is a savage strength. Some say it should be expected of a people on the edge of nowhere, but they may as well be from another world. They come to the loot and their eyes see much, yet comprehension does not follow." "Surely it can't be that bad," Soraka scratched his arm. "Trade allows ideas and culture to flow and mingle." The Laerti snapped her jaws in amusement. "Ah, that is what many say. I trust that you have not been this far from the Confederacy before?" "I haven't. In a word, they are primitives, and not in the pure and noble way that some from the civilized lands look fondly upon. Stormport is the furthest end of the Sapphire Coast. Beyond is a world gone mad. Strength and possession are the beginning and end of everything. It is not a place for reasonable folk." "I see. So nothing like the loot?" "Nothing at all. You are lucky that you sailed the Cerulean Way. The journey overland is at least 4,000 kilometers of sheer insanity. The Confederation, the Commonwealth, the League." The reptilian demi-human waved a claw and made a disgusted expression. "Hopeless, all of them. Good for their raw resources and nothing more." "What do they sell?" hides, timber, medicinal herbs, magical beasts that their hunting parties capture. They probably have plenty more, but they're too territorial to allow foreigners to survey their territories and prospect for wealth. Many a hopeful merchant or sage come here to make inroads to no avail. If there's no success to be had here, then why not continue west on the Cerulean Way? Some have luck trading with aquatic demi-humans further along the sea lanes, the Laeti merchant admitted. But the prospects are poor and the risk great. Red dragons dwell around the volcanoes dotting the northern coast. Arirania pirates plague the south. No one in their right mind would brave all that for so little. But you do know what lies beyond, yes? More savages. The Laeti's voice grew dismissive. Some even say that the human tribes beyond have founded countries. The occasional beastman from Rolengork brags about slaying them in the west, but many believe that their claim of a human country is merely a tale to make their boasting seem more impressive. As if slaying humans was impressive in the first place. The scorn in the Laeti's voice only ever seemed to escalate when she spoke of Rolengork. That didn't bode well for Soraka's mission at all. Much to the merchant's delight, Soraka purchased the red dragon scale vest. Davy gave him a look when she saw the item hanging over his arm. "How much was that?" she asked. 15,000 platinum, he answered. "Those gem coins were burning a hole in my pocket." "Just because you have money doesn't mean you have to spend it." "It was a good deal," Soraka said defensively. "A quarter of the price back home. Didn't you say you were going to stock up on the way out?" "I did," Davy admitted, "but now you're carrying that thing back and forth from wherever we end up. The fact that it was the same price here as red dragon scale vests are in Stormport means that the merchant was having trouble selling it. You should have let me deal with them." "If I did, you would have left her with a seizure." Davy peered at him suspiciously. Her striped tail straightened behind her. "Her?" The merchant was Laeti. "I hope so, for both your sakes. This isn't a place to be picking up strange women. That aside, I had my misgivings coming in, but now I haven't a clue what the Ashta-Pradhan hopes to gain here." Soraka's whiskers twitched at the mention of the Confederacy's ruling council. "You can blame the Dabir for that," he said. "Or maybe my father since he nominated me for this role." Davy would have much preferred to be traveling closer to home, where industry and commerce flourished. She was a lady who enjoyed her modern conveniences. Unfortunately for her, the council's task regularly had them travel to far-flung lands beyond the influence of the Central Powers. All 6 of the great nations around the center of the continent were locked in a Cold War being fought in all directions. Open conflict between any of them carried a high risk of destabilizing the balance of power in an undesirable way, creating undead-infested wastelands, or both. All they could do was expand their influence in the world beyond, trying to gain various advantages over one another. Word of a powerful tribal confederation of beastmen forming on the fringes of the known world was not something the Beastman Confederacy could ignore. From a distance, they seemed likely allies in the struggle for dominance. "We could have gone to Arborea instead," Davy muttered. "What I've seen of the locals, plus the utter lack of our rivals' presence here, doesn't inspire much confidence. I would think that our rivals not being here means that we'll have the run of the jungle. Or it means that it's not worth anyone's time," his wife told him. "I'm inclined to believe this to be the case. The markets here don't paint a promising picture." "Let's not keep talking about this in an open market," Jaraka said. "Where are we staying, by the way?" "Jaraka's right," Soraka nodded. "The Kamilini said that there is a place for tents." "Tents?" Davy growled. "Please let us summon houses." "Tents," Soraka told her. "We're trying to not stick out too much here." Davy groaned, as did Jaraka. Kasturi, as expected, didn't care either way. Soraka was accustomed to war camps and long campaigns in the Confederacy's many colonial frontiers, so he didn't mind living rough. At least they wouldn't be sleeping on branches. After Davy made her purchases, they returned to their caravan. A few other groups had already returned. Soraka went and joined a tall Lega female who was gazing out at the desert. The dunes cast long shadows in the setting sun, the heat of the day was rapidly ebbing away. "What did you find, Karavaki?" Soraka asked his second wife. "The 4 elements are worshipped here, as expected," Karavaki answered without turning her attention from the scenery. There is some variant of a storm god, but he's not associated with the storm dragon lord. The consort of that storm god is a water god unrelated to the usual elemental gods. How is that noteworthy? Rolengork is landlocked, Karavaki replied. Most cultures that have paired storm and water gods are in or around large bodies of water, usually seafaring civilizations. Could it be because of the monsoon? Kasturi asked. They should have them in this part of the world. It's possible, Karavaki said. Cyclical events can become central to a religion. The thing about these gods is that they are also personified. There's the possibility that they're powerful individuals from the past. Who are they? Soraka asked. Karavaki pulled a notebook from her satchel. Let's see. Unique to Rolengork are a god of storms, god of waves, god of the hunt, god of nature and god of order. What do they look like? Jiraka asked. The shrines here only have idols and icons. No historical depictions. Idols are rendered in the forms of the local beastman races. Any icons I've noted so far tend to be nature-themed. It was the same process that they had seen in so many other parts of the world. People attributed supernatural significance to events, people and ideas. When sufficiently developed, belief or adherence to those religious and philosophical concepts became the source of what was commonly known as divine magic. This thought was in no way cynical. Of course, without the cultivation of a tangible belief system, divine magic was inaccessible. What that understanding did lead to, however, was more questions. If mere belief could manifest magic, then what else could it do? Could deities be born through that power? Perhaps they already had been, unbeknownst to their worshippers. Have their belief systems produced divine casters? Soraka asked. They have divine casters, Karavaki answered, but what those divine casters are is yet to be determined. As a whole, it is a society of primitive tribes that confederated in the last century or so. There are heavy elements of nature and ancestor-themed mysticism. The organized religion is not very organized, so they could just as easily be druids as they could be true priests. They encountered similar primitive mystical practices more often than not. The world was a place where lasting stability and progress were universally cherished, but not often achieved. Calamities both natural and unnatural tore gaping holes in civilization, some of which were powerful enough to reduce vast swathes of the continent to ruins. What's the local history like? We're not even in the country yet, his second wife chided him. So far, nothing contradicts what I've read in the libraries of Stormport. 200 years since the last cycle here, huh? According to what was publicly accessible in Stormport, what this region of the world experienced was one of the more severe manifestations of the cycle. What countries had been present were wiped out, leaving disparate groups of survivors. Those who survived were incapable of restoring what was lost and devolved into primitive tribes as they were forced into subsistence, and history faded to obscurity and myth. The extent of the cycle's effects was unknown, but the thoroughness by which everything was ruined in Rolengork suggested that everything beyond the Great Loot was in a similar state. That they confederated is a significant achievement, Karavaki said. Most places like this reform into hundreds of petty kingdoms and remain in a state of savage tribal competition. The Ashtapradhan was right to send us here. The purposeful energy in the Laga's voice was unmistakable. She was what the people of the Confederacy called an uplifter, one who reached out to worthy peoples devastated by the cycle, helping them to rebuild their shattered societies. Born in a fishing village in one of the Lake Kingdoms in the Confederacy, she was a devout priestess venerated for her philanthropy. Many temples, monasteries, hospitals, schools and other public works were raised through her efforts. Soraka didn't doubt that she would do the same here, should they find a promising ally in Rolengork. We were a romantic evening watching the sunset over the dunes. I'm jealous. A barhead, striped black and white, emerged between Soraka and Karavaki. It was Soraka's third wife, Mitra. She placed a paw on each of their shoulders. Does that mean we'll be busy tonight, G? Maybe we can even drag Davy away from her goods. Hey, don't ask for the impossible now. Mitra chuffed amorously as she rubbed her cheek against Soraka's arm. She was a princess from another kingdom in the Confederacy's northwest, but unlike the devout and assertive Karavaki, she was a playful and sometimes mischievous Sharon. No one could stay mad at her for long, and she had a bard's characteristic way with people. This, more often than not, made her the default diplomat in their entourage. In all, the official core of his party consisted of himself, an accomplished military commander in the Overlord of Gond, a powerful magnate, a sacred claw and a talented Sharon. Between them, they could analyze everything that needed to be reported to the council as they traveled the world at the Ashtapradhan's behest. The next morning, Soraka watched his breath mist in the frigid air as their cargo was transferred to wagons suited for the earthen roads leading north out of Great Tier. Jaraka came over to stand with him, Liang Devi's goods. 20 tons of salt. I could torture a lot of people with that. Why does torture have to be the first thing that comes to mind? Soraka asked. It was the funniest thing that came to mind, Jaraka answered. The first thing that came to mind is we're already traveling through the blistering desert sands, and now we're doing it with wagons full of salt. We'll all be mummies by the end of this. It's a cruel and unusual form of torture. I guess torture was the first thing that came to mind. It isn't as if Devi's making you sit in it. Sure seems like it with how full she's packed those damn wagons. They wrapped themselves in layers of protective cloth before continuing on their journey. The road passed the shimmering salt pan of the Great Tier before entering the irrigated farmland along the river that fed it. Demi-human farmers tended crops of grain, legumes and squash. Little in the way of livestock aside from some lizards could be seen. In the north, the dry, barren mountains of a barrier range slowly grew on the horizon. Another 3 days' travel saw them at the next town, where they crossed over a major tributary to continue following the river northeast. The air cooled as they made their way up an arid valley, and they arrived at the border town 1 week after departing Great Tier. Their Camelini caravan master turned to them once the procession of wagons stopped in a wide stone lot southwest of the settlement. This is where we must part ways, good mistress, he said to Devi. Rolengork lies over the pass. Are you sure? Devi asked. We'd be more than happy to pay for your services throughout our journey. And we would be honored to receive your patronage, the Camelini answered. But monetary compensation is not the problem. The dangers of Rolengork are too great for our kind. From here, you must find someone from the north to replace us. Dangerous for the Camelini, but not for us? The Camelini were native to arid climes, so leaving it to enter the jungle could present various problems for them. Poor terrain for themselves and their lizards, diseases, hostile flora and fauna. Is there some sort of customs procedure that we must undergo? Devi asked. There are no beastman officials here. Tolls and taxes are handled at each clanhold. This one is afraid that he does not know much more. Thank you for bringing us safely through the loot. Devi pressed her paws together and lowered her head in gratitude. Let's settle our business, shall we? While Devi paid the caravan master, Soraka eyed the town. After a moment, his gaze wandered to the wind-carved slopes bracketing the irrigated valley floor. Is something the matter, Soraka? Kasturi asked. Soraka blinked, his gaze going to the Gladestalker. He retraced the path of his vision. The locals are scarce. It wasn't like that on the way here. Not so safe, then. Kasturi's emerald eyes scanned the surroundings. So far from home and still acting the war master. Any place can become a battlefield, Soraka replied. Do you see anything? Nothing. Whatever these people are wary of must come from further away. Or maybe underground? Realistically, it could be any number of things. They were at the fringes of the Storm Dragon Lord's domain. Once they left, they might be attacked by anything from bandits to feral tribes to magical beasts or even the local dragon. At least we might be able to meet new and exotic people, Jaraka said. I wonder what they taste like. Soraka gave the Inquisitor a reproachful look. Oh, don't give me that, Jaraka said. I don't doubt you've been dreaming about savage princesses to add to your harem. His wives turned suspicious looks at him, even Devi, who was still speaking with the caravan master. Is that true? Karawaki asked. Of course not, he answered. Of course it is, Mitra laughed. If a suitable candidate appeared, IG would be a fool not to take her. That doesn't mean I dream about encounters with savage princesses, Soraka replied. What are the chances, anyway? Though vast and prosperous, the Confederacy was not gifted with divine bloodlines and celestial weapons like a few of its neighbors. They made up for it through various means, striving in every field to cultivate their strength. Soraka and all of his wives were extraordinary individuals by the measures of the Beastman Confederacy. They were the crystallization of centuries of careful breeding, part of the effort to maintain the balance of power between the 6 superpowers at the center of the continent. Finding candidates to add to the matrix of exceptional bloodlines was a bonus objective for their travels. With the odds as they were, however, it may as well have been a dream as Jiraiya suggested. Even so, Kawabaki said, if the dream comes true, make sure you consult with us. Who knows what sort of trickery they have out here. That kind of strength is impossible to fabricate, Soraka said. Oh yeah? Mitra said, what if they claim to be someone like Devi? As a merchant, Devi was not particularly strong on the battlefield, but she was unparalleled in commerce. Soraka has taken her as his first wife as a statement that powerful individuals could come from any caste, that martial strength was only one pillar of a civilization's success. Then they would have to prove themselves, Soraka told his third wife. Be they artisans, magic casters, farmers or whatever else, we have measures for everything. I am not so easily deceived. Wait, Jiraiya said, we're looking at farmers, now? It's more that an exceptional farmer easily sticks out, no? Soraka said, cultivating crops in impossible conditions or producing insane yields. People would notice that sort of thing straight away. Devi parted ways with the caravan master, instructing the house guard to help unload the wagons. She looked toward the quiet town as if searching for something. What are you searching for? Soraka asked. A beastman caravan master, Devi answered. Transport is pre-arranged around here. A merchant from the north comes here, then switches to the Camelini if they want to go further. The wagons they use to get here wait until they return. Usually, they go no further than the border towns. They use Nug to draw wagons in Rolengork and the vehicles are made for muddy roads. If that's the case, Mitra said, we have to wait here until a merchant comes from the north and hope that they'll let us hire their wagons while they're away south? Or we send someone over the border to bring wagons to us. How far is it? 100 kilometers. So we're stuck here for at least 4 days, Soraka mused. Unless we get lucky or they've got some fast breed of Nug that we've never seen before. The distance was easily made in a day by the members of their entourage, but the wagons hauling their goods were another story. Thinking that we could inject ourselves into the flow of merchant traffic was too optimistic, Soraka said. I never expected a country so large to have so little international commerce. Devi replied defensively, don't make it sound as if I blundered somehow. This is just wrong. I'm not blaming you, I'm just stating the reality of things. We need to shrink our caravan to an amount the entourage can carry without needing to rely on transport. Devi grew more and more sullen as he spoke. Soraka sighed. Maybe it won't be so bad after we cross the border, he said. His offering did little to mollify Devi. She preferred to travel with large caravans and even fleets of ships loaded with her cargo, drawing ore and wonder at every destination with mountains of goods. It wasn't so much a matter of greed as it was her way of enlightening the locales that they frequented of the wide world. Still, profit could be had at every turn and so she would turn a profit wherever she went. The seemingly isolated and primitive Rolengork was a challenge that she was adamant about overcoming, though she would probably complain all the way through. It took the full 4 days that he had guessed for an empty caravan of wagons to arrive for their goods. To Devi's delight, Kasturi reported the existence of a robust river network used to transport goods all over Rolengork. So it's a jungle out there, right? Jiraiya asked. Not, in reality, another valley filled with sand that happens to look like a jungle. Yes, my love, Kasturi rolled her eyes. I can't say that the flora and fauna are the exact same, but it is not dissimilar to the rainforests of the Confederacy. Great, Jiraiya said. Then let's get ourselves out of this hell.